Hello and welcome. My name is Ariane Hofstede, and I'm the administrator of the Maryland Heritage Areas Program. And I'm joined today by my two colleagues, Andrew Arvizu and Martha Waldron, who you'll be hearing from in just a little bit. But this information session is about our fiscal year 26 grant round. And if you could move the slide forward, please, Andrew. Our contact information, in case you have any questions after the session, please feel free to reach out to us. And our next slide outlines our agenda. So as you can see, we have a full list of items that we'd like to get through. We're going to spend a little bit of time at the beginning talking about what a heritage area is, giving you the context of our program. We're going to also walk you through what eligibility criteria is needed for you to apply to our grant program. We'll be talking about the two different types of grants that we offer, the capital and non-capital, and then everything else that you need to know to successfully submit an application to us for consideration. A couple of resources that we want you to keep in mind. This session that's being recorded is something that we hope you will refer back to as needed, but we also have some documents that are saved on our website that you can refer to as well. So our guidelines are included in that. We have some step-by-step instructions that outline reviewer criteria and considerations, as well as just walking you through all of the questions in the application, giving you suggestions on how to answer those questions. There'll also be some sample applications on our website, our grants manual, which gives you an understanding of if you were to be awarded a grant from the Maryland Heritage Areas Program, what the requirements and conditions for properly stewarding and administering that grant would be. And of course, as I said, these slides will be available. So keep those resources in mind as you move through the process. Always know that you can reach out to us. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Andrew, who's going to get us started with some information about what is a heritage area.
Yeah, so over the next few slides, I'm going to talk a little bit about what heritage areas are, and then I'm going to transition to talking a little bit about MHAA as a program. But to kick us off, I want to start with the most important part of our program, and that is our heritage areas. So there are 13 heritage areas across the state of Maryland, and each one you can think of as a concentration of cultural, historic, and natural resources. And heritage areas are unique in that they're partnerships between local communities and the state. So they're locally designated and operated, but they're state certified and supported. And really the goal of these heritage areas is to highlight, preserve, and share the unique cultural identity of each part of the state that they reside in. You can see here that across the state of Maryland, you're never too far away from a heritage area. In fact, every single county in Maryland and the city of Baltimore is home to a heritage area. And while not the entire state is covered, you can see by this map that that every single county has representation by this program, and whatever work your organization is doing, you're never going to be too far away from these borders. Now we'll talk a little bit more about borders in subsequent slides, but this map is just to give you a sense of the breadth of the program. Now I want to turn to talking a little bit about the mission of our program so you can get a better sense of what these heritage areas do. And this mission statement really is at the core of all of our heritage areas goals, as well as that of the program. And that is to support the economic well-being of Maryland's communities by preserving and celebrating the state's historic, cultural, and natural resources through partnerships and place-based experiences. And one of the main mechanisms through which we achieve that mission is heritage tourism. In other words, getting people to come and visit a unique part of the state for the unique cultural and natural resources that exist there. There's a lot of different definitions out there for what constitutes heritage tourism. But the one that we typically rely on comes from the National Trust for Historic Preservation, and they describe heritage tourism as traveling to experience the places and activities that authentically represent the stories and people of the past and present, including historic, cultural, and natural resources. So that was a little bit about our program. Now I want to talk about MHAA, or the Maryland Heritage Areas Authority, as a body. So MHAA is an independent unit of government that operates in the Maryland Department of Planning and is administered by the Maryland Historical Trust. But for clarity's sake, I want to point out that we are not a program of the Maryland Historical Trust. They have their own separate grant programs that are also available, and MHAA is its own unit of government. In fact, MHAA has its own governing body made up of 19 members, representing 9 state agencies, and it receives its own funding, $6 million annually, that comes from Program Open Space. Of that $6 million, around $5.1 million go towards MHAA's grant programs that you're going to be hearing about today. Now, the program has 3 primary goals, and those goals are developing heritage tourism products, building partnerships, and sustaining regional identity. So the heritage tourism product speaks a little bit back towards our goal of fostering economic well-being through heritage tourism. And heritage tourism products can include all sorts of different things. It can be your traditional, what you might think of immediately, things like historic homes, museums, but it can also be all sorts of other types of work that are going to get people excited to come and visit what makes your part of the state unique. That could be things like trails or enhancements to natural resources. It could be walking tours or research that's going to be turned into a documentary or a museum exhibit. Anything that's going to get people excited to come learn about and visit your part of the state falls under that developing heritage tourism products goal. The next goal, building partnerships, really is about connecting folks who are already doing so much great work across the state of Maryland. We are so lucky to be home to so many different organizations, community groups, nonprofits, and governments that are already doing so much great work within the heritage realm. We want to be supporting projects that are going to connect folks, whether that's connecting a community organization to a local museum or an upcoming nonprofit to a government agency. We're always looking for opportunities to foster those connections so that people can be sharing in the great work that they're doing. And then our final goal, sustaining regional identity. So even though Maryland is geographically a fairly small state, it is home to so many unique cultures and identities, whether that's over on the Eastern Shore, in Western Maryland, down in Southern Maryland, or in Baltimore City. We want to make sure that we are working to preserve all of the different regional identities that fill this state. So we're always looking for projects that make sure that these identities will be preserved for future generations. So I mentioned a little while back that the program is unique in that it's a partnership between the state and local levels. And that really comes through in our model when you take a look at the differences between the work that the state program does and the 13 heritage areas. This slide sort of breaks that out. So you can see here that MHAA at the state level provides capital and non-capital grants, which you'll be hearing about today. We provide funding and support towards the individual heritage areas, in particular mini grant funding they then give out. And we provide technical assistance for grantees and applicants. But it's really at the local level with the individual 13 heritage areas where this program really shines. Local heritage areas work as members of their community to connect various different organizations, to provide training and assistance to different groups. They engage directly in the grant review process, creating their own grant review panels and making their recommendations on which projects should be funded. And many of them operate their own mini grant programs that focus on specific regional priorities to ensure that funding can support different organizations within their local heritage area. So that's a little bit about who we are and how our program operates. I now want to turn a little bit towards our eligibility requirements. And luckily, there's really only two major eligibility requirements for our program. The first is that applicants must either be a nonprofit or a government agency. And that government agency can either be local, state, or federal. And if you're a nonprofit, you do need to be in good standing with SDAT. That being said, if being in good standing is any concern, please feel free to reach out to us, and we'll be more than happy to help with those kinds of challenges. We never want that SDAT situation to be a barrier to you applying for the program. So that's requirement number one. Requirement number two is that the project that you're proposing must take place within the boundaries of a heritage area. Now, it's important to note that your organization does not need to be located within a heritage area. So, for example, if your organization is based out of DC, but you want to do work within a heritage area, let's say in Prince George's County, you're good to go. As long as the project falls within those boundaries, then you are eligible. Now, I've already talked a little bit about boundaries. I want to walk through how you can figure out where you fall relative to those boundaries. So we do have a great video tutorial that goes into all of the details as to how to do this process. You can access the tutorial by entering the link on this screen that you see here. But I'm going to go ahead and quickly walk through how you would do that. So first, you'll want to log on to MHAA, which is Maryland's Cultural Resource and Information System. Once you're on MHAA, you'll want to navigate to the Layers tab and then select Other MHT-based Data and Maryland Heritage Areas. Once you've done that, that will highlight the boundaries of every heritage area in Maryland in that light purple that you see on the right hand of your screen. Then the only thing that you need to do is put in the address of your proposed project and see where that dropped pin falls relative to the highlighted boundaries of the heritage area. Now, there is a possibility that the project that you're proposing will fall outside of the boundaries. If that is the case, we still encourage you to reach out to your local heritage area to start a conversation about your project. There is no guarantee that they will be able to amend their boundaries to include your project, but it is always useful for local heritage areas to understand the type of work that's taking place around them, even if that work is outside of the boundaries. Additionally, starting that conversation will put you on the local heritage area's radar for the next time that they are looking to expand their boundaries. And it may also connect you to other potential grant opportunities that that local heritage area knows about. So whether you are in the boundary or not, I can't encourage you enough to reach out to your local heritage area director so that you can have access to the communities that they are fostering at the local level. So now, shifting from boundaries, I want to just give a brief overview of the schedule for this year so you can understand what the timeline will look like for this grant round. The first and most important date that we want you to walk out of here with is January 27th of 2025. That is when intent to apply forms are due, and you must submit an intent to apply form to have access to the full application. So whether you know or not that you are going to certainly be submitting an application, we strongly encourage you to get an intent to apply form in. It is a non-binding document, but that deadline again is January 27th of 2025. The next big date is the full application deadline. That is March 3rd of 2025. Between April and June of 2025, applications are going to be reviewed both at the local and state level, and you'll be notified of the review decision on or around July 10th of 2025. That July 10th date is also your project start date, meaning it's the earliest date that you can begin to incur expenses or to put forward matching funds. Then between August and December, grant agreements will be drafted and you will be executing those grant agreements. And finally, sometime around December of 2026, first payments will be going out to selected grantees. So that sort of gives you a timeline. Certainly incorporate that into your proposed timeline when you're thinking about submitting your application, that those first payments may be coming out in December or January after you have received your grant award. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Martha, who's going to talk us through the different types of MHAA project grants.
Thank you, Andrew. So once you all have determined if you're eligible for a Maryland Heritage Areas Program grant, the next step is to think of a project that you would like to apply for funding. This is a project-based program, meaning that this program funds projects that are either non-capital or capital in nature. These are the two types of projects that we support. I'm going to walk through the details of these, first of which is capital projects. You can think of these as your traditional brick and mortar construction projects, but there are a number of eligible activities that fall under this category. We like to think of capital projects as having a lifespan of 15 years or more, to make sure that the work that's going into these projects is long-lasting and is worth the investment. So you'll see that acquisition is a type of capital project that this program will fund. Development, meaning the repair or alteration of an existing building, or perhaps new construction of a site or a trail. Rehabilitation, restoration, and then pre-development as well. So any plans or fees for architectural design or engineering all fall into the capital project category. For capital projects, it's important to know that they are all subject to Section 106 review. This is a federal law that we are held to, and so your project will undergo a compliance review through our colleagues at the Maryland Historical Trust. It's also possible that if your project is eligible or is currently listed in the National Register, your project may require a preservation easement through our colleagues at the Maryland Historical Trust. These conditions and special preservation conditions are something that we're happy to speak with you about. If you have questions or concerns, please reach out to us. We're more than willing to introduce you to the folks who operate these programs and would be happy to facilitate that introduction. A capital project does not have to be a historic property. Please keep in mind that there is a wide range of capital projects that you could come up with. We like to point to this example on the slide as a good example of a non-historic capital project. So you can see that this this trail in Hagerstown was created in order to link various cultural sites. So the project was to create this beautiful walkway, to incorporate landscaping, interpretive signage, and to link various sites with a physical trail. So this is a great example of a non-historic capital project that may be relevant to what you're envisioning for your own organization. I do want to mention that consent from the property owner is required at the time of you signing your grant agreement, if you were to be awarded a Maryland Heritage Areas Program grant. Capital projects range from $5,000 to $100,000 and require a one-to-one match of non-state support, which I will talk about in more detail shortly. Here's a little bit more information about preservation easements that I just previously referenced. They are a condition of your grant and they are term easements. So they are not in perpetuity. There's a length of term that's dependent on the grant amount and the duration of your grant project. Again, we would be happy to introduce you to the easement team at the Maryland Historical Trust and are very much willing to work with you through these requirements to make sure that your project can move forward. The other type of project that this grant program funds is a non-capital project. So we talked about capital, construction, brick and mortar. This is very much the opposite. So any type of planning, which could include a feasibility study, design documents for an exhibition, any type of interpretation, a wayfinding study or a wayfinding signage, brochures, any type of educational program, and then of course, additional programming like a festival or a commemoration, all qualify under the non-capital activity. These grants or this type of project has a grant amount, a minimum of $5,000 up to $50,000 with that required one-to-one match of non-state support. I think it's important to reference the ineligible grant expenses while you all are thinking of potential projects. Please keep in mind that unfortunately this grant program cannot fund overhead expenses for applicant organizations. So we cannot fund your However, we do have an opportunity for non-capital projects and nonprofits applying for non-capital projects to include a 10% line item in their budget for indirect costs. This is spelled out in much more detail in the project grant guidelines that Ariane mentioned at the beginning of the presentation that you might have about this consideration. I mentioned earlier that all of our project grants require a one-to-one required match of non-state support. What this means is that for every dollar of state support, the applicant or the grantee is required to contribute $1. This is really an effort to show that there is buy-in and this is a partnership and it's a requirement of our program. The match cannot be spent outside the grant period or on an unrelated project. And we also like to track other project costs. So please consider when you are building your budget, the overall cost of your project may be much more than what you're applying for funding. And we'd like to see those costs so we can track what the need is and what you're really going to be spending on this specific project. I also think it's important to note that other state funds cannot be used as a match. So if you are the recipient of, for example, a bond bill or perhaps a DHCD grant, unfortunately, you cannot use that to fulfill your matching requirement. However, you are welcome to use private dollars, county dollars, any other type of funds to fulfill that matching requirement. We like to encourage folks to get creative when it comes to the match, and we know that it can be difficult to fulfill, and we really urge you to think of all of the possible ways that you can come up with the required one-to-one match. So cash is obviously a good example of how you can fulfill this requirement, but we also want to point out the value of staff time, especially staff who are working on the project, the massive importance of volunteers, which might include board members or partners who are also spend time working on the grant project, and any donated or discounted goods, materials, or services that you could use as in-kind matching funds.
All right, thank you, Martha, for walking us through the capital and non-capital different grant options that we offer. I'm now going to spend a little bit of time walking through the application itself and highlight some aspects of the review process so that you are aware of what is involved. Both the capital and the non-capital applications have 3 primary sections. The first is the project information section, where we ask you to tell us what your project title is. For the project summary, this is a brief, short explanation, the elevator speech, so to speak, of what your project is, to get that across to us just immediately and succinctly. The overall project description, where we ask you to go into more detail about your project. Let us know if it's a new initiative, if it's part of an ongoing phased project that you're working on, and the details of what the deliverables and outcomes will be. And then the project timeline, letting us know how long you anticipate the project to take and what components will happen when. In the budget information section, this is where you tell us what you're asking for. How much are you requesting in grant funds from the program? You'll also indicate your equal match that Martha was just talking about, which will be the same exact amount as the grant request that you're submitting. And in this section, there is also the opportunity to upload and the requirement to upload a Excel spreadsheet outlining the different line items of your budget. And we will provide that form for you in the application. We also ask in the budget documentation section for you to provide any supporting materials. So this could be estimates that you have to back up the amounts that you're putting in your line item budget. It could be an explanation of how you came to the amount that is listed in your budget, just letting us know how the amounts were devised and what your justification is for the request that you're making. The project impact section, this is where you're really telling us how your project aligns with the program goals and in supporting the local heritage area priorities and goals as well. And I'm going to go into that section in a little bit more detail in just a minute. The other section to be aware of is the property information section. Now, this is only applicable to capital project requests. This is where we would be asking what the property name is, if it has a name, what the address is. If there is a significant context that you want to share with us, perhaps it's in a historic district, it's on the National Register. Tell us the history of the place and why it's important and the context in why the property and the request that you're asking for are aligned. The property owner consent that Martha mentioned earlier, this is the section where you will indicate that you're aware that property owner consent will be needed if you were to be awarded a grant. So with that, we're going to move on to just give you a sense of the different points that are assigned to each of those sections. So you'll notice that there are only points assigned to the project information, the budget information, and the project impact sections. There are no points awarded in that property information section if you are applying for a capital grant. You see here that the project information section is worth 10 points, the budget section 10 points, and then that project impact section is worth 80 points. That's where the majority of your points are going to be calculated when our reviewers are spending time considering your application. So we're going to spend a little bit more time breaking down that project impact section so you can understand what it is that we are looking for when you submit these requests and how those different points break down. So the first question in the application is related to increasing heritage tourism. This question is worth 23 points, and we're really asking about the heritage tourism product or deliverable that you're going to be creating with your project and how it's going to be impacting visitors and the community in which it's taking place. So here we'd be looking for quantitative and qualitative ways that that project is going to be contributing to heritage tourism in the local area. So for example, visitation that you might expect, the number of items produced. If you're putting a brochure forward, you could tell us how many you are planning on printing, and how the project or the product is going to maybe spur new investments or be contributing even to a new body of knowledge or a story that hasn't been told before. You know, we do fund, particularly in the non-capital applications, research projects. And if there's research that you want to do that will ultimately end up as a heritage tourism product, let's say you're researching a particular story and ultimately you see that turning into an exhibit or a printed material later on, that is something that is eligible for consideration. The other thing to focus on is partnerships. So this is the second question in the project impact section. It's worth 15 points. And we're really curious to hear how your project is going to engage with other partners. And the partners don't have to be present for the entire length of the project. Maybe they're just participating in the beginning or the middle or the end. Any partners that you're working with to help bring the project to fruition. Also, are those partners bringing some resources to the table that are helping to leverage the overall impact of the project? Are you working on a common goal together? Is there a vision that you share? You know, how will those partners maybe help each other build capacity, build visitation, build impact in the area? One thing to keep in mind with partners is that your local heritage areas are considered partners. So please make sure that you list them and you're in communication with them as well. We did give an example here of a partnership that could be taking place, and I will let you all refer to that as needed in the future. I don't feel the need to read it to you, but it just outlines two organizations working together to make a project come together and how they both have mutually beneficial outcomes. All right, the next question in this project impact section is about sustaining regional identity. And this question is worth 20 points. So this is all about highlighting the unique aspect of the local heritage area in which your project will be taking place. How is that project going to support a place-based experience that really showcases the heritage area's distinct, either historic, cultural, or natural assets or traditions or resources? I highly encourage you to reach out to your heritage area, to talk to them about your project. They can help give you guidance and advice on how to really strongly answer this question. We want you to really speak to how your project aligns with the local heritage area's priorities, themes, and goals. But if you have a project that's been identified by a local community organization that is fairly new, and you don't feel right away, you don't feel that you have an understanding of how that project fits in with the heritage area's goals, please talk to them about that. And also express to us why you feel it's important, why you feel that it highlights something unique in your heritage area. All of our heritage areas do have planning documents that lay out their priorities and their themes and their goals. You are encouraged to read those and get familiar with them so that you can then turn around and explain to us how your project really helps support those. It's not necessary to directly quote lines or words from those documents, but we do want you to be able to speak to how your project helps support those. But again, speak to your local heritage area directors for some good guidance there. One thing that's new this year is we are going to be awarding up to 2 points for projects that highlight an aspect of Maryland's involvement in the 250th anniversary. So if your project qualifies or will be doing that, then we want to hear about it, and you would be eligible to receive potentially up to 2 points for a project in that focus priority interest area. In the application, I will just say, in the application, we do cite the executive order that came out of the Maryland 250 Commission's work. so that you can get a better understanding of how your project, if it is something that is centered around America's 250th anniversary, of how you're helping to support that initiative for the state. Okay, also in the project impact section, there are a couple of other questions where we would like to hear from you about diversity and inclusion. How does your project support, sustain, or promote historically underrepresented narratives? We absolutely want to hear from you about that and have a better understanding of how your project might be supporting those voices and those stories. Physical or programmatic access. Are there provisions or aspects of your project that are going to be focused on helping individuals with disabilities to access the resources that you're providing? And then we want to know about the urgency of your project. Now, why does this project have to proceed now? Consider what would happen if you didn't receive these funds, if you only received partial funding of the award. Tell us how that would impact you and why you need these funds now and why you need them from the Maryland Heritage Areas program. Beyond the project impact section, there are some supplemental documents that we do ask for in the application. One of those is if you have a project that's going to be taking place on land that's owned by the Maryland Department of Natural Resources, we do need you to get in touch with them and get an approval letter from them so that there's an understanding that they approve of the work that you're proposing and that there's open communication between you and DNR. In the application, we provide the instructions for that. And you can see here that there's also an email. We encourage you to reach out to them very soon in the process to get this review underway and to ultimately get the letter of support from them that we would ask you to include in your application. The other two potential supplementary documents are if you have a project, this would apply to our non-capital application, that is education focused. Perhaps you're proposing to do some work with K through 12 educational partner, could be your local school or a program that's centered around a school project, could be curriculum focused. Then we would like to know from the partner that you'll be working with that they are in agreement with what you're proposing and just a little bit of context of how the two of you will be working together. So we'd like to see a letter of support documenting that attached to the application. For resumes, CVs, and letters of support, so we do want to know who the people are that are going to be working on the project. We do ask that you upload resumes and bios so that we have an understanding of who from either staff, volunteer, or consultant perspective, but also include your board members, will be working to fulfill what you've outlined in your project description. If you have a situation where you're going to be hiring a consultant and you have not hired them yet, and you don't have a CV to provide for that person, you can simply provide the qualifications that you'd be looking for in who you would like to hire in that consulting capacity. For letters of recommendation, I will just say, we could just go back one, thanks. For letters of recommendation or letters of support, you are welcome to submit letters of recommendation from either partners that you'll be working with or elected officials in your area. It's always good to know that the community that you're going to be serving with this product or this project are enthusiastic and on board with what you're doing. But letters of recommendation are not required for the application. They are optional. Okay, thank you. Next slide. Thanks. Supplemental documents, a few others to keep in mind. If you are a nonprofit organization that is applying to our grant program, then you must submit organizational documents. So those include articles of incorporation, bylaws, proof of nonprofit status. all nonprofits that are applying, even if you've applied to us in the past and we've received your documents in the past, we still require that you include them in your application that you're currently submitting. One last thing to be aware of is for archaeological projects, applicants proposing any type of work in that area, you do need to align with the Maryland Historical Trust archaeological guidelines. So we provide a link to those in the application, and there is a checkbox in our application where we ask you to indicate that you're aware of the guidelines and you understand that your project would need to adhere to those. For the review process, we wanted to just give you a little bit more information about how that works. So I believe this was mentioned earlier that our review process includes both a local review and a state review. Once both the local and the state have completed their reviews, those scores are combined, and then there are recommendations that are put forward to the Maryland Heritage Areas Authority for funding to be ultimately approved and then for the applicants to be awarded. There's more information about this in our guidelines, so we encourage you to look there, including a sample scoring sheet that you can refer to that really outlines in one glance everything we just went over in terms of the number of points that will be allotted towards each section of the application and what the questions will center on. So just a few tips as you are working through writing your application, the process of thinking about your project. We really encourage you to start from the beginning, think about what you're doing with your project, think about the timeline, consider if you have flexibility and if the timeline that you're proposing really aligns with when our grants would be awarded. As Andrew mentioned, that July 10th date in 2025 is the start date for all grantees that will receive funding. If you have project activities that will be starting before that, they would not be eligible for funding or consideration. So map out your timeline, make sure it lines up with how our funds would be administered to ensure that it's a good fit. Also thinking about how the project fits into your organization's big picture. You know, what steps do you need to finish the project? Do you feel that you have everything, beginning, middle, and end, to get you through to completion? Obviously, who's going to undertake the work? And ultimately, you know, what are the desired outcomes and how do they align with the program's goals and the local heritage areas' goals and priorities? A few other tips. Obviously, reading through the guidelines that, as I mentioned, will be available on our website. Can't encourage you enough to do this ahead of time. It really will give you a solid understanding of what's required in completing the application process and hopefully answer some questions for you up front. Do not wait until the last minute. Start writing early. If you want to do letters of recommendation, get those requests out early. Laying out your budget. This is something that can take longer than expected, especially if you have a capital project that you need to get estimates from contractors or other vendors. Get those estimate requests out soon and start really formulating your budget as soon as you can. Of course, asking questions of us at the state level, but also, as we have said many times before, contacting your local heritage areas and talking through your project. They can be immensely helpful in helping you write as strong an application as possible. One tip that we would share with anyone applying for any grant is have somebody that's unfamiliar with your project read your application. You know, they can objectively tell you if the way you describe your project is coming through as clearly as you would like it to. Giving your project a unique and descriptive name in terms of the title is always something that, you know, helps really succinctly explain what the project is and stand out. So give that title some thought and make sure it's getting across exactly what the project is that you are proposing. And then those matching funds. So you don't have to have the matching funds in hand or committed at time of application, but if you were to be awarded a grant, you are required to provide those matching funds during the life cycle of your grant. So starting to think about where those matching funds are coming from and having a solid idea of if you're going to be able to fulfill that requirement is extremely important. So this is an example of having your project description, your timeline, and your budget all align. This is something that we really want to emphasize in putting your grant application together. It's very important that there's consistency among these three elements. So in that description, you're telling us what the project is and who's going to be working on it and what the deliverable or the outcome is going to be. The timeline reflects all of the components that you've shared with us in the description. And then the budget highlights each of the costs associated with them, those components. So you think, oh, yep, we're good. I think everybody got that. So a couple of other pieces of advice from our reviewers. So remember, we have our local reviewers at the heritage area levels, and then we have our state grants reviewers, or sorry, our state level grants review panel. As they're reading applications, they really want to see a clearly defined heritage project. So a project that is centered around heritage. How is it going to be highlighting the local historic, cultural, natural heritage in your area? Make that clear. Give us an understanding of how people will engage with that project. And also, how is it going to help the local community? Will it bring new people to your site? Is it enhancing an existing relationship? Explain that connection. When you're crafting your application, know that our panelists come from a wide variety of professional backgrounds. At the state level, with our grants review panel, we have over 40 members that will be sharing the responsibility of reading all of the applications, and they come from many different areas of expertise. So write it in a way where a wide variety of people from different professional backgrounds could really understand the project that you're putting forward and be able to clearly see what it is that you are requesting. So for the last two tips, make sure that you're really writing down what it is that you want the reviewers to understand about your project from your perspective. Don't try and write to what you think they want to hear. Tell them what it is that you want to do. It's your project, you do best. You can really explain the details of it and the importance of it from your perspective. And if your project is primarily a planning or documentation project, focus on how that planning or the documentation is going to lead directly to a heritage tourism product. So I talked about this a little bit earlier. If you have research that you want to do that's ultimately going to result in an exhibit, or on the construction side, if you need to do some construction documents and some planning work to lay out how the building that you want to house that exhibit in is going to be configured, then we support that as well. But we need to see the continuum or understand how the planning work or the research work is going to ultimately end up in a heritage tourism product that the public can access and enjoy. So just a quick recap of some of the information we've gone over. Some key action items. Submitting your intent to apply by Monday, January 27th is step number one. Very important. You have to submit your intent to apply to be eligible to submit the full application. Read the guidelines. I know we said this before. We'll keep saying it, and use those as a resource. There is a checklist at the end of those guidelines to help you through the process. Talk with the staff at the local heritage area level, and feel free to reach out to us but talking to those local heritage areas will help you understand how your project aligns with their goals. And that is very important for you to explain in that project impact section. If you do want to do letters of recommendation, upfront, early in the process is when you should be reaching out to your legislators and your partners for those. If you do not own the property, when you're starting the application process, that's the time to notify the owner that you want to pursue this project and to let them know that ultimately there is a strong likelihood that they would have to submit a letter of consent if you were to be awarded the application or the grant. And again, if your project is taking place on DNR property, we need that approval letter, so start that process early. And starting the budget. Those are really the key items that we encourage you to do very early on in the process to help position you for submitting the strongest application possible. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Martha.
We want to be transparent in this process and let folks know what the funding availability is for fiscal year 2026. Each year, the program distributes approximately $5.1 million in grants. We receive an average of 200 project grant applications each year, and we see about 50% of those become funded by the program. I do want to be clear that the grants review panel at the state level can choose to award partial funding depending on fund availability and the eligibility of your project. So this is just a FYI for all of you. We find that this is a frequently asked question, and we want to be transparent with the popularity of the program and what type of funding is available. We are hosting a variety of Q&A sessions over the next couple of weeks to be there to answer questions for folks who are considering applying for this program. So please jot these down. This is also available on the MHAA web pages, and you can go there to find the connection information for these virtual Q&A sessions. Lastly, I just want to point out a couple of other funding opportunities that are available in case you are looking for a new pocket of funds to tap into for whatever you and your organization might need. We encourage you to look at the grant programs that are available at the Maryland Historical Trust. Our colleagues at MHT run a number of grant programs, including an African American Heritage Preservation Program, and a historic preservation non-capital and capital program. Also look into a couple of general operating support sources that are out there. Consider the Maryland Hudson Memorial Shine Grant Program with Maryland Humanities, and any county or city grants that you might find in your local areas. So these are just two examples here. The Anne Arundel County government offers a program, and Annapolis as a city also offers a community grant program that we urge you to look at similar opportunities in your slice of the state. There also are a number of preservation-focused programs that exist, including those at the National Trust for Historic Preservation, and this one that's also listed, the African American Endangered Sites Matching Grant Program, which is through the African American Heritage Preservation Foundation. Our colleagues at Maryland 250 are also promoting and accepting grants this year. There are 3 opportunities that are listed on this slide, and we urge you to take advantage of those and look into those as well. And then lastly, I'll mention that each of the 13 heritage areas conduct their own mini grant program. Andrew mentioned this at the beginning of our presentation, and we really urge you to be in touch with your local Heritage Area Director to learn more about those opportunities and to see if they might be a good fit for your organization and for things that you might be interested in pursuing.
Great. Thank you, Martha. So we have come to the end of our webinar. We're going to conclude at this point But I wanted to share that we are going to do a separate recording that walks through the technical aspects of how to create an account on our grants portal, how you submit your intent to apply, and how you submit your application. Just walking you through the technical aspect of doing that online. So that will be a separate webinar that we're going to post on our website alongside this one to walk you through those aspects. And know that, again, you can reach out to any of us at any time to help you with that process. We thank you for joining us, for learning about our program, for considering submitting an application to the Maryland Heritage Areas program. And we look forward to hearing from you and hearing about your projects and all that you're doing to promote heritage in our state. So thank you, and take care.